Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. We're still on the Why We're Catholic, Our Reasons for Faith, Hope, and Love book series by Trent, and we are on chapter 23, which is Why We Defend Marriage. So in case you missed any of the other videos, I will have them all linked below. So in this chapter, he talks about marriage and the Catholic view of marriage. So to some people, marriage might just be a legal contract, a piece of paper, but in the Catholic Church, marriage is a covenant. It's a sacred pledge of loyalty between persons. In the Catholic faith, it's an entire, total giving of self to another person for the good of each other and also for the good of any children. He writes how Jesus said that when a man and woman marry, they are no longer two but one. What therefore God has joined together, let not man put asunder. And that's Mark chapter 10, verse 8 to 9. So it's a very serious and permanent bond, a permanent pledge, but the Catholic Church does allow for legal separation and even civil divorce if there's a circumstance like spousal abuse. But, however, if the couple are both baptized Christians, then following the teachings of Jesus, they're still validly married. And the Church therefore prohibits either person from being remarried. He writes how sin cannot undo what God has joined together. And so some people might say, oh, well, I've known a lot of people in the Catholic Church who have gotten divorced and then gotten remarried, and that all they had to just do was get an annulment. But the thing to remember, the thing to note is that an annulment isn't just like a Catholic version of divorce. With divorce, what divorce does is it tries to dissolve a valid marriage. And with an annulment recognized that there was never a valid marriage in the first place. So it might have appeared that the couple was married on their wedding day, but a necessary element of marriage was missing. And there are many different cases for this, and he goes through some of them, such as understanding of marriage. You can't validly say I do unless you know what you're saying I do to. If a person attaches conditions to marriage, like I'll stay married as long as we live near my family, or does not understand he or she are agreeing to be in a permanent monogamous union that is open to life, then the marriage may be invalid or never happened in the first place, and thus declared null, hence the term annulment. And then other circumstances like consenting to marriage, a person might be coerced into the marriage or just marrying to please others, then they're actually not free in making their own decision. And also a psychological disorder or even being drunk, all of these things could prohibit the person from freely saying I do. So those are just a few examples. And then the question is, why do I have to get married in the church? A civil marriage isn't valid unless it's done in the eyes of the state, like a judge or an approved minister, and according to the law of the state. A Catholic marriage isn't valid unless it happens in the presence of a church and according to the law of the church. Weddings must normally take place in a Catholic church unless the bishop grants an exception, because marriage is one of the most sacred responsibilities that a person will undertake. So it should also begin in a sacred place, given the nature of it. The church also wants to make sure that the couple understands the vows that they're undertaking of permanence, monogamy, open to life, which is why the church doesn't allow weddings to take place in other denominational churches where the same views aren't always shared. And so, regarding openness to life and children, the church doesn't teach, oh, just have 1 million kids and have a baseball team. But it's also not like China, where it tells you the maximum number of children that you're allowed to have. The Catechism simply states that parents should exhibit generosity appropriate to responsible parenthood, and that they should not use immoral means like abortion or contraception to plan their families. And so we discussed the sexuality in my last video about lying with your body, like your body's telling a lie. So when an unmarried couple has sex, you're expressing something with your body. You're physically expressing a vow where that vow hasn't actually been made yet officially. You're expressing a level of permanence that's not actually there yet in your relationship. One of the vows that the church asks couples to make on their wedding day is to accept children lovingly from God. This being said, a Catholic couple doesn't need to get pregnant every single time they have sex. They don't have to be trying to constantly get pregnant, but it also means that we can't directly sterilize the sexual act. And he writes how in order for sex to be a one flesh union, it must be a total gift of self. Total. Nothing, not even fertility, can be held back. And it must be ordered towards something beyond the husband and wife's private feelings. In the Catholic Church, love, what St. Thomas Aquinas said, love is to will the good of another. It's not about ourselves. It's not about like our own selfish desires, pleasures, personal feelings. It's to will the good of the other. So it's something bigger than ourselves. He goes on to write about natural family planning, how couples can actually both follow the church's teaching and responsibly plan their families. And so what NFP does is it uses fertility tracking technology. So if a couple wants another baby, you can choose to be intimate on the woman's identifiable fertile days. And then on the other hand, if the couple is not ready to have a baby, they would just choose to be intimate on an infertile day instead. And so NFP requires both partners to work together to track fertility and to decide when to be intimate. It's hard. Like he's writing about how it can be difficult to wait for those days. And I've heard many other people, like Catholic couples, actually speak honestly about this. They're like, yeah, it's honestly hard. But in doing this, it forces couples to have patience and communication and to resolve conflict. And this actually helps. I've heard people say that because of this, it really improves their marriage. And Trent Horn writes how maybe this is why couples who use natural family planning have divorce rates between just 1% and 3%. Isn't that amazing? It's like, sure, society can bash the whole, like, oh, Catholics, and Margaret Sanger even, I was watching an interview of her, and she mentioned how she's like, Catholics, what do they know about love? What do they know about marriage?
Well, let's look at the official Catholic position. When the marital relation is so used as to render the fulfillment of its purposes impossible, that is by birth control, it is used unethically and unnaturally. Now, what's wrong with that position?
Well, it's very wrong. It's not normal. It's not, it has a wrong attitude toward marriage, toward love, toward the relationships between men and women. And I think it's untrue, and I think it's unnatural.
Well, let me ask you...
Everything bears it out that it's an unnatural attitude to take. And how do they know? I mean, after all, they're celibates. They don't know love. They don't know marriage. They know nothing about bringing up children or any of the marriage problems of life. And yet they speak to people as if they were God.
Do you believe in sin? When I say believe, I don't mean to believe in committing sin. Do you believe there is such a thing as sin?
Well, I think the greatest sin in the world is bringing children into the world that have disease from their parents, that have no chance in the world to be a human being, practically. Delinquents, prisoners, all sorts of things just marked when they're born. That, to me, is the greatest sin that people can commit.
But couples who use natural family planning, divorce rates between 1% and 3%. That's amazing. I also, side note, but I heard a story of the lowest divorce rate in the world is this little town in Bosnia where they do this beautiful thing on their wedding day. It's like the marriage crucifix, and on their wedding day, they have this crucifix, and they kiss the crucifix, and then they kiss each other, knowing that this is the center point of their marriage, and they hang this crucifix above their bed or somewhere in their house to constantly remind themselves. And I think that's just such an amazing testimony. The lowest divorce rate in the entire world, like pretty much no one in that town gets divorced. Yeah, it's like, say what you want about the Catholic teachings, and maybe a lot of people don't agree with them, but when you really look at these teachings put into practice, how beautiful and fruitful and amazing people's marriages can be, given our society and how often people get divorced and people cheat on each other and no one stays together anymore. I think it's really, really beneficial, really amazing for our society for us to reconsider and take these things seriously. Back to the natural family planning topic. Some people might say, oh, well, isn't that just a Catholic version of birth control? That's what I used to think. To be completely honest, this is one of the teachings that took me the longest to accept. Trent Horn explains how it might appear the same, like natural family planning versus artificial contraception, in that you're trying to not have a baby in a certain time. But while they might appear on the outside to be the same, they're actually not. And Trent Horn explains, he gives an analogy to explain the difference. Imagine you're trying to select a wedding date, and it's right around the time your wife's high school age cousins have a big football game. So if you really want them to attend the wedding, obviously you'll pick the date for your wedding to be the week before the game. But let's say your budget is super tight and you're really trying to cut back. You have no more room on your guest list. So what you might want to do is actually schedule the wedding during the big game and send them an invitation anyway, just as a sign that you still value the relationship. If they end up showing up anyway, it might be a little stressful, but you'll be glad they came. Now, on the other hand, you didn't want to wait another week, and you for sure, absolutely, 100% do not want your cousins to come to the wedding. In order to make sure that they don't arrive, you send them a disinvitation that says, please don't come here, you're not wanted here. But we're going to enjoy ourselves anyway. So if you can imagine picking the date in this analogy, picking the date that works best for the cousins is like being intimate on a fertile day. You've created the optimal conditions for the cousins to arrive, and then postponing the wedding by a week is like waiting to be intimate on an infertile day. So the children probably can't arrive, but if they do, that's great anyway. You'll just figure it out. It'll be fine. And you'll be glad that they came. But on the other hand, sending a disinvitation is like using contraception. It's like telling your cousins, we want this day, so just don't show up and ruin it. We don't want you here. It's like saying we want sexual pleasure at this specific time, but we don't want children showing up to ruin it. But Trent Horn writes how children actually don't ruin sexual pleasure. It's fulfillment, which I think is such a beautiful analogy. Yeah, again, that's one of the teachings that I really struggled with. It really took me reading Humanae Vitae. I really suggest everyone to read this by Pope Paul VI, a document regarding birth control that I really encourage everyone to read. This was when birth control was first starting to get popularized and being used. I guess it was like the 1960s. But he writes, it's kind of a warning of if this is prevalent in our culture, what's going to happen. And he writes about the objectification of women. It's just really powerful, and please read it. If you're one of those people who's wants to learn more, if you want more information, I will link it below, and it's a really good read, and it really was eye-opening to me, along with other readings that I've done when I was researching all these things. So yeah, that is pretty much it for today's video. The next video will be on chapter 24, which is why we believe there's a hell. And then the last chapter is 25, about heaven. So thank you for watching.